As we continue in the third week of our Seeing the Unseeable series, we turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18 to discover God in things that we cannot see. So we do not lose heart, even though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For this slight momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all measure, because we look not at what can be seen, but what cannot be seen. For what can be seen is temporary, but what cannot be seen is eternal. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Good morning. I thought it was interesting that Pastor Mike picked the scripture for this morning, and he's gone, and the scripture's on aging and death and dying. But there is hope in all of that, so hopefully we'll learn a little bit about that. I am humbled and blessed to be speaking today. So many of you live examples of a Christ-like life in your sermons to me, so I really appreciate that. And I think it's important before we start any talk that we need to set the stage or the tone so you can get an idea of where the talk is going. So I have a story or two to share. So as I wrestled with the sermon topic today, I have to say I had millions of ideas about where to go and thoughts that were coming at me. And it was kind of hard to get focused. And it was even to the point where I even thought about maybe writing, 1, 2, or 3 sermons. And it reminded me, and there's a lot in this, but it reminded me, though, of a story about a pastor one time, and he got up in front of the congregation, and he said, I hold in my hand three sermons. And the first sermon is a $100 sermon, and it lasts 5 minutes. The second sermon is a $50 sermon, and it lasts 15 minutes. And the third one's a $10 sermon, and it lasts 1 hour. And now let's take the offering and see which one you want me to deliver. So you have to realize that I'm not an expert on this, so it doesn't matter how much you put in the offering plate. My talk is going to go how long it goes. It could be 5 minutes or it could be an hour. So another story, a pastor saw one of his parishioners who hadn't attended church a lot, so he thought he would issue him a challenge. And he said, you need to be in the army of the Lord. And the church member replied, he goes, I'm already in the army of the Lord, Pastor. And the pastor was astonished, and he responded, and he said, then how come I only see you at Easter and Christmas services? And the parishioner stepped up close to the pastor, and he whispered in his ear, I'm in the secret service. So anyways, now getting back to the tone or the idea. So after all of this, there's no place to go but up, right? Okay, so, but before we go, I'd like to ask some questions. And I think they're questions that are kind of coursing through our lives today. And so I'm going to ask them hypothetically, but if you want to answer these questions to yourselves, you can certainly do that. And these aren't necessarily fun or nice questions, but they're questions I think that we all are dealing with today. Like first off, is there anybody here who is just plain tired? Did you stay up so you don't have to raise your hands because there's a lot of these. All right, but did you stay up way too late last night watching the Olympics? It was all you could do to drag yourself out of bed to get here on time. Have you had a big weekend and it doesn't really look like it's over yet? Are you thinking about the things around the house that you would have liked to have gotten done, but you didn't? The dishes, the laundry, the cleaning. Did the kids take all of your attention and it was all you could do to get their baths and get them into bed, and then throw yourself into bed and just to wake up to the alarm this morning? There's probably those of us like me who are here today whose knees are hurting from cold weather and osteoarthritis. That's probably happening. People with back pain. Maybe the migraine is acting up again, or the flu bug has caught up with you over the past couple of weeks or month. Maybe you're even dealing with a chronic health condition, or a loved one is dealing with a chronic health condition that is almost too much to bear. There are people here that probably have had a bad week at work. Somebody whose boss was angry at them for no reason, or the pressures to perform at work were just getting harder and harder to take. Customers or clients or patients or parents probably yelled at you and got angry at you for no reason. You have coworkers that you might be becoming more and more frustrated with. Some of us probably got stuck in traffic this week, or we had to wait in long lines. We had a delivery service that delivered the package to the wrong address, or they lost it. We've had arguments and quarrels with maybe our spouse or our girlfriends or boyfriends or coworkers. Is there anyone here who blew their budget this week? Maybe it was just a struggle to pay bills. Did the decline in financial markets, the up and down this week, affect your retirement plans? Or maybe Bitcoin turned into a bit of financial disappointment for you? Is there anybody here who made a mistake this week? Maybe it cost you a loss of confidence and trust, but maybe it wasn't such a big mistake but it bothers you because you just haven't done things like that before. Did somebody disappoint you this week? Did your friends let you down? Did someone break your trust? Were you faced with a tough personal situation? Did you have to live through the death of a loved one? Do you feel burdened or sad because of the events that have occurred in recent days with regard to gun violence, sexual harassment and abuse, or discrimination? Were you bullied at school or made fun of in some way? Is there somebody here whose character was challenged by their friends and coworkers, or their relatives or their acquaintances? See, you thought that there was no way that this sermon could go anywhere but up, but it went down, didn't it? Okay. The truth is that every day we are faced with circumstances that can erode our joy. So the question is, do we dwell on the problem, or do we remain confident in God's faithfulness? Do we accept the expectation that our world places on us, or do we rely on our faith to know that God will be with us in good times and in bad times? So I ask you now, is what you are experiencing, is it what you will be experiencing in the future? Because that's what this message is about. And let me tell you this, our scripture today is one that is filled with hope. We live by faith and not by sight. And Paul is here to tell you this today, that the answer to this question is a big no. In fact, Paul says emphatically, do not lose heart, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. So what do you fix your eyes on, the seen or the unseen, and why is that important? So I have some short stories, not jokes, but these are stories that I think might illustrate a couple of points about that. Story number one, it's one of the great questions of the universe. Why does your computer printer always run out of ink at the worst possible time? Rosie, my wife, and I were so happy. We got our taxes finished last Sunday evening, and we needed to print out our return. But guess what? The print cartridge ran out of ink. So I needed to venture out and buy a print cartridge. And on my way, I thought I would stop at the grocery store and pick up a few things. Just a quick trip, right? Easier said than done. More to come later. Story number two, on an extremely different note, 2 weeks ago, we experienced the end of the football season with the extravagance of Super Bowl 52. Not only is there so much excess hype and attention paid to the game and to the players, but to the halftime show and to the commercials. It's truly a spectacle. And I would venture to say that there is much more at stake for the marketing executives of the advertisers that spent $5.2 million for a 30-second commercial than it was for the players on the field. More to come later. And then story number three, I'm giggling because I don't know if Rosie knows this, but several years ago in September, Rosie and I took a trip to New England to do a little hiking and also take in a few sights. We were excited to take a trip up Mount Eisenhower in the White Mountains. I had done this hike a number of years before, but forgotten what it was like. The trail guide information said that it was a moderate hike. More later. So before we visit each of these stories, I'd like to make a couple of points. We fill our eyeglass prescriptions or our contact prescriptions with the lens of the world rather than through the lenses of God's eternal hope. Point number 2, we often allow our worth to be determined by what we have or what we don't have. God doesn't see us the way the world sees us. He sees us as one of his beloved children. Ephesians 1:11 says, it's in Christ that we find out who we are and what we are living for. He had his eye on us. He has designs on us for glorious living. And then point number 3, we need to look beyond the path that we are on. We are so focused on our own agendas, our own priorities, our own needs, that we fail to look up to get a glimpse of the eternal. So back to story number 1 about the print cartridge. You see, my printer is an HP. It's a common printer. It's a LaserJet. I only needed to pop in the store, get the cartridge, and head out. But I had some problems. First off, there are a lot of different printer cartridges in the world. I mean, there were 3 or 4 shelves of print cartridges, and I wasn't sure where to go in the vast sea of all these print cartridges. Problem number 2 is I don't like to ask for help. I'm sure if I had gone to the counter, they would have taken me right there to begin, right at the start. On my way into the store, I got 4 text messages, and my mind was not focused on cartridge buying, but it was focused on responding to those 4 text messages. And then remember I said I was planning on stopping by the grocery store on my way home, and I was also trying to remember what were the things that I had to get at the grocery store. So I was also preoccupied with my schedule the next day. It was a Monday. I had the day off from my normal babysitting job, and I knew I needed to work on my sermon, so that was running through the back of my mind. I finally found the HP print cartridges, but it was still a big area. And all I could see was HP, which I think is what they wanted me to see. So I stood there and looked and looked and looked. I think I stood there for 10 minutes, could not find it. So I asked for help. The guy took me right back to where I had been standing, and the print cartridge was right there, right in front of me. But here's what the situation is. My preoccupation with other things was keeping me from seeing what was right in front of me. So we can get so caught up in our schedule or our own needs or our own demands, our own priorities, that we lose sight of what's happening right around us. So we need to take off the lens of the world and put on the lenses of God, our eternal hope. Here's a video, too, that I think might illustrate a little bit more about this point. Has anybody seen that before? You know what's going on here? This video was made in Washington, D.C. at a metro station at L'Enfant Plaza. If you've been to D.C., there's probably a good chance that and ridden the metro, there's probably a good chance that you've gone through there. There are 5 different metro lines that intersect in L'Enfant Plaza. It was made in conjunction with an article called Pearls Before Breakfast from the Washington Post. The author, Gene Weingarten, won a Pulitzer Prize in journalism for his article. Did you recognize the violinist? It was world-renowned violinist Josh Bell. And just several days before he played in a sold-out concert hall in Boston at the minimum ticket price of $100 a ticket. The violin that he played on in the metro station was a $3 million violin. On this day, 1,097 people passed by. He played for 45 minutes. Only 7 people stopped for longer than a minute to take in his performance. 27 people gave money for $32 and change. So from the Washington Post article, it says, Bell said, at a music hall, I'll get upset if someone coughs or if someone's cell phone goes off. But here, my expectations quickly diminished. I started to appreciate any acknowledgement or even a slight glance up. I was oddly grateful when someone threw in $1 rather than a little bit of change. In his 2003 book, Timeless Beauty in the Arts and Everyday Life, British author John Lane writes about the loss of appreciation for beauty in the modern world. The experiment at L'Enfant Plaza may be symptomatic of that, he said, not because people didn't have the capacity to understand beauty, but because it was irrelevant to them. This is about having the wrong priorities, Lane said. If we can't take the time out of our lives to stay a moment and listen to one of the best musicians on earth play some of the best music ever written, if the surge of modern life so overpowers us that we are deaf and blind to something like that, then what else are we missing? When it was over, you saw the lady at the end. Her last name was Furukawa. She introduced herself and tossed in a 20. Not counting that, it was attainted by recognition. She had seen him at the Library of Congress. The final haul for his 43 minutes was $32.17. Yes, some people gave pennies. Actually, Bell said with a laugh, that's not so bad, considering. That's $40 an hour. I could make an okay living doing this, and I wouldn't have to pay an agent. But what a good example of looking up. As I mentioned, too, back to story number 2, the Super Bowl, one of the biggest consumer spectacles in the world. Over 110 million watched, and major advertisers pitched to them. Here's an article from Allegheny College's newspaper, The Campus. It was written in 2013. It's a little dated, but I think it still makes the point. Materialism has plagued American society since the beginning of the 50s. With every decade, we take another step deeper and deeper into the pit of consumerism. We have built mega mall complexes to satisfy our need for material possession. We spend more than Spain and Italy on advertising than they do in their economies. And worse, we revel in it. Super Bowl Sunday has become a monument to our addiction. This Sunday, when companies battle for the funniest and most entertaining commercial of the night, know that the ad you are watching cost the corporation an unbelievable, and this year it was $4 million. To put that in perspective, an average American who works for 35 years will just make under $2 million in his or her lifetime, enough to buy 15 seconds of airtime. With hundreds of catastrophic dilemmas facing mankind, it's amazing to think that we still contemplate spending fortunes to convince ourselves that we should buy Doritos over any other brand of chips because the commercial was just too funny to resist. The entire continent of Africa struggles to provide $12 million to fight malaria. But we can enjoy a blackmailing dog with a bag of Doritos in his mouth, a child dressed as Darth Vader attempting to turn on a Volkswagen. While it may be wrong to deny that this is an ideal time to advertise, after all, Volkswagen's commercial that year had over 56 million views on YouTube. It would even be more outlandish to claim that spending such a fortune on a 30-second ad is logical when solutions to global issues cost a fraction of what we pay for these commercials. So you see, our society is one that is measured by what we consume or what we have. And that's how our society tries to identify who we are. You know, the Super Bowl is a spectacle, a good example of possessions, food, beverages, music. So these are good examples of tangible things, but they're not maybe a good example of things we can see. Things like goodness, integrity, happiness, joy, healing, commitment, kindness, faithfulness, and love. See, those are the eternal, those are the unseen things. Okay, and on to story number 3, the White Mountains. But before I go there, I got to interject another story. It's funny how when you're thinking about things, things come up along the way. In our Sunday morning Sunday school class, we've been studying the book of Numbers and talking about contentment. And it's a story about the Israelites wandering in the wilderness. And was it last Sunday? I think it was last Sunday. We talked about Numbers 22. And the story just kind of tickled me. And it's a story about sight. So I thought it would be a good example to talk a little bit about today. But I was reminded, don't go into the detail that you went into in class. They said, Herb, don't do that. If you're going to talk about it, give the Cliff Notes. So you're going to get the Cliff Notes on this. So the Israelite army had been wandering the desert, and their reputation had become that as a fierce warrior nation because God was on their side. They had just annihilated the Amorites, a fierce country with fierce warriors, and literally wiped them out. So the Israelites camped on the plain of Moab. This is not Moab, Utah. Okay, this is Moab in the Holy Land. The Moabites were distressed because the Israelites were taking over their land. They were consuming their food and doing all kinds of things. But the leadership of Moab did not want to fight the Israelites because they knew that they would be defeated because of their strong reputation. So the king of the Moabites did something pretty creative. He said, you know what I'm going to do? He goes, I'm going to find somebody who can put a curse on these guys before we fight them. That way, we'll have a pretty good chance of winning. So they contracted with a seer, a diviner by the name of Balaam. And Balaam lived over 400 miles away, but he had a good reputation as a seer. When he cursed people, they stayed cursed. And when he blessed them, they stayed blessed. He also charged a customary divination fee. This is how he made his money. In fact, so many people were requesting Balaam's services that he was very, very rich. And in his mind, he was also greedy. The other thing that's interesting about this is the reputation of the Israelite army was so strong that the king wasn't stupid. He got somebody over 400 miles away to put a curse on these guys, not somebody in the neighborhood. So Balaam seemed to be able to talk with God, and when the Moabites arrived with their fee to ask him to come down and put a curse on the Israelites, he said, just a minute, I need to consult with God. And he used the word Yahweh, which is the Israelites' word for God. So God talked to Balaam, and he said, no, don't do this. So Balaam went back to the Israelites, or Moabites, and said, nah, can't do this. God said no. So they go back, and the king's like, surely we're going to defeat it. I'm going to send a higher-ranking official, and I'm going to triple. This is my terms. It didn't say that in the Bible. But he goes, we're going to offer him a substantial amount more money to come down and curse these guys. So they went back up, and they asked him, and Balaam said, let me see what God says, hoping he'd get a big yes. And God didn't really say yes, but God said, you know what? You can ride along with them. Now, in Balaam's mind, he heard yes. Right? So he's expecting a big payday. So Balaam saddled up his old trusted donkey, rode back to Moab with them, accompanied by 2 of his servants. But on the way, something happened. God became angry with Balaam, probably because he was focused on greed and not focused on what God wanted him to do. He was more worried about his fee than he was about blessing or doing God's work for God. So I'm going to read the rest out of the Bible. So here's how the rest of the story goes. As he was going, though, God's anger flared. The angel of God stood in the road to block his way. Balaam was riding his donkey, accompanied by his 2 servants. When the donkey saw the angel blocking the road and brandishing a sword, she veered off the road into the ditch. Balaam beat the donkey and got her back on the road. But as they were going through a vineyard with a fence on either side, the donkey again saw God's angel blocking the way and veered into the fence, crushing Balaam's foot against the fence. Balaam hit her again. God's angel blocked the way yet again, a very narrow passage this time. There was no getting through to the left or to the right. Seeing the angel, Balaam's donkey sat down under him. Balaam lost his temper, and he beat the donkey with his stick. Then God gave speech to the donkey, and she said to Balaam, "What have I ever done to you that you have beat me these 3 times?" Balaam said, "Because you've been playing games with me. If I had a sword, I would have killed you by now." And the donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your trusty donkey on whom you've ridden for years right up until now? Have I ever done anything like this to you before?" "Have I?" he said. "No." Then God helped Balaam see what was going on. He saw God's angel blocking the way, brandishing a sword, and Balaam fell to the ground, his face in the dirt. God's angel said to him, "Why have you beaten your poor donkey these 3 times? I have come here to block your way because you're getting way ahead of yourself. The donkey saw me and turned away from me for these 3 times. If she hadn't, I would have killed you by this time. But not the donkey. I would have let her off." Balaam said to God's angel, "I have sinned. I had no idea you were standing in the road blocking my way. If you don't like what I'm doing, I'll head back." But God's angel said to Balaam, "Go ahead and go with them, but only say what I tell you to say. Absolutely no other word." And so Balaam continued to go with Balaam's nobles. So there's a lot of things going on with this story, and I'd just like to make a few observations, and then I'll talk about the one point I wanted to talk about. The first one was a talking donkey. Okay, and then Balaam talked to him, right? He didn't say, "What, a talking donkey?" He talked to him like he knew what he was talking about. So the other thing is, donkeys have a reputation for being stubborn and foolish. And what happened to Balaam? Balaam was the one who was stubborn and foolish. The donkey was the smart one. And so, he was trying to protect him. See, Balaam couldn't see the angel of the Lord because he was focused on greed. And God kind of has a way sometimes, I think, of helping us to see things by making our path more narrow and narrow and narrow until we have to make a decision one way or another. And then also about Balaam's half-hearted apology. He apologizes the same way I do, I said, "Well, okay, I guess I'm sorry." He didn't say, "Lord, I repent." He said, "I have sinned," but he didn't say, "Oh, Lord, I'll follow you, I'll go all your ways." He goes, "Well, if you want me to go, I guess I'll go along." So there's a lot of different points, but the main one is this. Sometimes we don't look up from the path that we're on to get a glimpse of the eternal. We become obsessed with our own fees, our own needs, our own greed, instead of looking up. So what does this have to do with a hike in the White Mountains? Well, remember I said it was a moderate hike? So what do you think of when you hear the word moderate? Yeah, I can do that hike. Well, let me tell you what moderate means in trail lingo. It means a steep grade. It means rocks, literally up the mountain. That was our trail. The trail becomes more difficult when it's slippery and wet. So you see, it was a beautiful day on the day that we hiked. It had rained several days prior, so the steep, rocky trail was even more treacherous because there were places where it was also slippery. We had to choose our steps carefully. I dared not look up because I would lose my footing and fall. Perhaps I would scrape my leg or hit my head or twist an ankle or even break some bones. I think the next one is a picture of Rosie. That's why I said she didn't know if I was going to show this or not. But she's showing off after navigating a flat, steep, though it's a little difficult to tell there, and slippery part of the trail. So it was particularly tough on my knees, which were definitely aching as I have no cartilage left. I picked my step from rock to rock, not even daring to look up. The trail was much more difficult than I anticipated, and it was taking a lot longer to reach the top. Finally, when we reached the top, I was able to take a look. I was so occupied with my own issues of making sure that my footing was right, that I wouldn't fall, that I was on the right trail, that I almost missed a glorious sight. Thank goodness the trail at the peak was flat, and we could look out and take in an eternal view. So we met other people on the trail that day, some navigating like myself, hiking a rocky trail from rock to rock, holding on to trees as we went up the trail. Others bound with giant leaps and steps. Some even had young children on their backs with backpacks. But that's how our faith is, isn't it? Some of us can take small steps each day, rock to rock. Other people can take big steps and carry a lot on their back. But we can't forget to look up and get a glimpse of the trail. So on our next steps this week, let's take a look at that. If you will pull out your connection card. I will take a moment to step away from the demands of our world and look up to get a glimpse of the eternal. This week in the Lenten season, I will stop to remember what it means to be a child of God. Or maybe this week, I will look through the lens of God's eternal hope and fix my eyes on the unseen. So take a look. What do you see? Are your eyes deceiving you? Therefore, do not lose heart, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. God's promises are more real and more true than we could ever conceive. If you will only take a look, your best life is yet to come.